Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This story is about my close friend Jake's grandfather and how he handled his inheritance in a remarkably clever way. He had two sons, and each of them also had two children. During the last 6 months of his life, Jake and I visited him every morning and evening. He was adamant about not moving into a retirement home, and honestly, he only needed assistance getting ready in the morning and preparing for bed at night. Let me provide some context first. Until 2020, we still had mandatory military service for 12 months in our country, but there were several ways to opt out. I'll explain the most relevant option since it relates to our story. Instead of joining the military, you could file for a conscientious objector status, which was basically a formality. You just had to write a one-page essay explaining why military service would conflict with your personal ethics, and they generally approved it. However, this meant you had to complete civil service instead. Civil service could be any job that broadly benefited society. These positions ranged from working in kindergartens to retirement homes, and everything in between. Hospitals, facilities for people with disabilities, meal delivery services, you name it. The pay was equivalent to military wages, and you received similar benefits like accommodation, health insurance, work uniforms, the same perks soldiers got. Since soldiers received free meals, civil servants either got meal service or a food allowance. I did my service at a retirement home in 2021, and it was truly eye-opening. That kind of work really humbles you as a young, overconfident person and teaches you what really matters in life. "Hey Tom," Jake said one day in early 2022, "I really need your help with something." His grandfather, Richard, couldn't manage everything independently anymore, but only needed assistance with his morning and evening routines. Since I had learned proper care techniques from professionals, Jake wanted me to teach him so his grandfather could avoid moving to a nursing home. "Of course I'll help," I responded without hesitation. Jake later confided that Richard had declared he'd rather end his life than enter a nursing home, and he seemed deadly serious about it. Jake hadn't told me this initially because he didn't want to pressure me, which I really appreciated. Jake was one of my closest friends, and I'd grown quite fond of Richard. I never had a grandfather of my own, but we visited him frequently, and I became his unofficial fifth grandson. The initial plan was for me to demonstrate the care routine for 2-3 weeks, observe Jake for another 2-3 weeks, and then let him take over. Instead, we ended up caring for Richard together for over 6 months, until he suffered a stroke and passed away within 2 days at the hospital. 2 days later, Jake called me. "Tom, would you come with me to the lawyer's office? They're reading Grandpa's will tomorrow." Richard had specifically requested his will be read the day before his funeral, which was unusual but perfectly legal. When I asked why Jake wanted me there, he explained that the lawyer had formally invited me. Apparently, Richard had left me something as a thank you for my help. Now, Jake's father, David, and his uncle Steve were both entitled, self-important people. When we arrived at the lawyer's office, the tension was immediate. "What the hell are you doing here?" David sneered at me. "Sure, Dad joked about you being his fifth grandkid, but this is for actual family," Steve jumped in. "Another youngster trying to get his hands on the inheritance, I bet." "The lawyer invited me," I replied calmly. "Take it up with him if you have an issue." David's face turned red. "If you've manipulated your way into this will, I'll bury you in lawsuits." "Show some respect and stop yelling," Jake interjected. "I know you two barely visited Dad, but at least show some basic decency." "How dare you speak to your elders that way?" Steve shouted. "You get exactly as much respect as you showed your own father." "None." Jake's voice echoed through the room, finally silencing them. We sat down to wait for Jake's cousins, Mark and Peter. David and Steve sat behind us, loudly discussing their plans for the inheritance. New cars, jewelry for their wives, luxury vacations, all purchased on credit, expecting to pay it off with their inheritance. Not once did they mention missing Richard or feeling sad about his passing. It was all about what they could buy with his money. When everyone arrived, the lawyer read out Richard's letter. I'll give you the condensed version, though the original was several pages long. "In recent years, I've noticed that some family members cared far more about me than others. I'm particularly disappointed in my sons, but I wanted to ensure absolute fairness, so I developed a point system. Letter phone call. 1 point plus 1 if lengthy. Visit 2 points per hour plus 1 point per hour of travel assistance with tasks. 3 points per hour. Final results for the past 3 years. David, 8 points. Steve, 10 points. Mark, 150 points. Peter, 133 points. Jake's brother Alex, 288 points. Jake, 7,341 points. Tom, 5,883 points. My assets, except the house, have been liquidated. Once the house sells, the total will be divided by the total points to determine each point's value, and everyone will receive their share accordingly. The silence lasted about a minute before David and Steve erupted simultaneously, claiming we had manipulated the system. They filed lawsuits, Steve's kids and David together, but lost. There was also a clause in the will, not read that day, stating that anyone contesting the will would forfeit their share. The legal battles dragged on for nearly 3 years. When we finally received the money in 2025, I was overwhelmed by the amount and wanted to share some with the other grandchildren, but Jake convinced me otherwise. "Tom," he said, looking me straight in the eyes, "you cared for him when he needed help without expecting anything in return. That makes you more family than those others ever were. They got exactly what they deserved." The next one is an entitled people's story. Let me start by saying I never expected to be dealing with homeowners association drama at this stage of my life. I bought this property, a beautiful 5-acre lot with a main house, guest house, and pool, about 15 years ago when the area was mostly undeveloped. Over the years, housing developments sprung up around my property, but since I owned the land outright and it predated any homeowners associations, I wasn't subject to their rules. The pool in question is a large infinity pool with a hot tub section, outdoor kitchen, and covered lounging area. I had it professionally built 10 years ago and maintain it meticulously. It's visible from the street since my property sits on a slight elevation, which I guess is what started all this nonsense. Things came to a head last summer when I started noticing unfamiliar people using my pool while I was at work. I have security cameras, and I'd get notifications showing groups of people, adults and kids, just walking onto my property and making themselves at home by my pool. At first, I thought they were friends of my teenage kids, but when I asked them about it, they were just as confused as I was. I decided to install better security cameras and put up private property no trespassing signs around the pool area. That's when I got my first letter from the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association and Homeowners Association for the development next to my property. The letter read, "Dear resident, we are writing to inform you that the community pool hours have been set for the summer season. Pool access will be available from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily. Please ensure your pool gate remains unlocked during these hours for resident access. Additionally, all pool rules must be clearly posted, and proper safety equipment must be maintained as per county regulations." I actually laughed out loud when I read it. I immediately wrote back explaining that this was my private property, not a community pool, and that any unauthorized access would be considered trespassing. I thought that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. A week later, I got another letter, this time from Karen Mitchell, the Homeowners Association president herself. She explained that since my property was surrounded by Pine Valley Estates, it was effectively part of the community and needed to comply with community standards. She went on to say that my selfish attitude about the pool was creating discord in the neighborhood. I responded with a certified letter from my lawyer explaining that my property was private, predated their development, and was not subject to their homeowners association. I also included copies of my property deed and documentation showing I wasn't part of their association. The next day, I came home to find a group of about 15 people, adults and kids, in my pool area. Karen Mitchell was sitting at my outdoor kitchen, acting like she owned the place. I pulled into my driveway and walked over to the pool area, phone recording in my pocket. "Excuse me," I said loudly. "This is private property. You are all trespassing and need to leave immediately." Karen stood up, smoothing her designer sundress. "Actually, these are the new community pool hours we established. You can't keep this facility all to yourself. It's not fair to the rest of the neighborhood." I kept my cool. "Ma'am, this is my private property. I own this land and this pool. You received a letter from my attorney explaining this. Please leave now or I will call the police." "Go ahead," she smirked. "I have documentation right here showing this is a community facility." She held up some papers. I pulled out my phone and dialed cop. "Yes, I'd like to report multiple trespassers on my property who are refusing to leave. I'm at address." Some of the other people started looking uncomfortable, gathering their things. But Karen wasn't backing down. "Everyone stay where you are," she announced. "He's bluffing. This pool belongs to the community now." "Karen," one of the other women said nervously, "maybe we should just go." "No, we have every right to be here. The Homeowners Association Board voted on this." The police arrived about 10 minutes later. By then, most people had left, but Karen and 2 other women remained along with their kids. 2 officers approached, and I immediately showed them my ID and property documentation. "These people are trespassing on my private property and refusing to leave," I explained. Karen tried showing them her documentation. which turned out to be the Homeowners Association meeting minutes where they'd voted to incorporate my pool into their community facilities. The officers were not impressed. "Ma'am," one officer said, "this is private property. The Homeowners Association has no authority here. You need to leave now or you will be arrested for trespassing." Karen finally left, but not before yelling that this wasn't over and that she'd see me in court. The next day, I had my lawyer send another letter to the Homeowners Association board, this time demanding they cease and desist all attempts to claim my property as community property. We also filed for a temporary restraining order against Karen and the Homeowners Association board members. But Karen wasn't done. She started sending out newsletters to all Homeowners Association members claiming I was stealing community resources and that my pool was a safety hazard that needed to be properly managed. She even tried to get the county involved by filing false complaints about pool safety violations. I documented everything. Every email, every letter, every security camera footage of trespassing. My lawyer was building quite a case. Things escalated when the Homeowners Association actually tried to file a lawsuit claiming adverse possession of my pool area. Their argument was that since people had been using it, trespassing, for several weeks, it was now community property. The judge threw it out almost immediately, but the harassment continued. Homeowners Association members would park in front of my house taking pictures. They'd send their kids to ring my doorbell and run away. Someone even threw pool chemicals over my fence one night. Thankfully, my security cameras caught that. I'd had enough. With my lawyer's guidance, I filed a major lawsuit against the Homeowners Association and Karen personally for harassment, trespassing, attempted theft of property, defamation, and damages. The security footage of the pool chemical incident was particularly damaging. That could have been considered attempted vandalism or even assault given how dangerous pool chemicals can be. The lawsuit really opened some eyes in the neighborhood. Many Homeowners Association members who had been following Karen's lead started reaching out to apologize, saying they had no idea the pool was private property and that they'd been misled by the board. One neighbor, Tom, who served on the Homeowners Association board, came to me privately with some interesting information. Apparently, Karen had been promising potential homebuyers that the neighborhood had a luxury community pool, and it even included pictures of my pool in their marketing materials. She'd been using it as a selling point to justify higher Homeowners Association fees. This was getting better and better. My lawyer amended the lawsuit to include fraud charges. The Homeowners Association's insurance company got involved at this point, and they were not happy. After reviewing all the evidence, especially the marketing materials using my pool without permission, they made it clear to the Homeowners Association board that they needed to settle this quickly. But Karen wouldn't back down. She called an emergency Homeowners Association meeting where she tried to impose a special assessment on all homeowners to fight my frivolous lawsuit. That's when the neighborhood really turned against her. "You told us that pool was included in our Homeowners Association fees," one homeowner yelled during the meeting. "We've been paying extra for a pool we don't even have access to?" Another resident stood up. "I specifically bought my house here because you showed me that pool during the tour. You said it was part of our amenities." The meeting devolved into chaos. By the end of the week, Karen was forced to resign as Homeowners Association president, and the new board immediately reached out to settle the lawsuit. The terms of the settlement were sweet: a public retraction and apology from the Homeowners Association for all false claims about my property, $50,000 in damages for harassment and defamation. They had to pay for additional security fencing around my property, a legally binding acknowledgement that my property is private and not subject to Homeowners Association rules, individual written apologies from each board member who participated in the scheme, reimbursement of all my legal fees, but the best part, the Homeowners Association had to hold a special meeting where they publicly admitted to all homeowners that they had misrepresented the amenities and had been charging fees for a pool they didn't own. This led to a separate class action lawsuit from the homeowners against the former board members for fraud. Karen didn't take it well. Last I heard, she's being investigated for fraud and misappropriation of Homeowners Association funds. Turns out the pool wasn't the only thing she'd been lying about. I used some of the settlement money to install an even better security system and a higher privacy fence. I also added some very clear signs stating, "Private property, no homeowners association affiliation, trespassers will be prosecuted." The new homeowners association board is much more reasonable. They're actually building their own community pool now, a proper one that they actually own. They even asked for my input on the design since they admired how well maintained my pool was. It's been about 6 months since everything settled down. Karen moved away after selling her house at a loss, and the neighborhood is much more peaceful. Some of the neighbors who apologized have become good friends, and I occasionally invite them over for proper authorized pool parties. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson about standing your ground when you're in the right. It would have been easier to give in to the pressure, but sometimes you have to fight back against entitled people who try to take what isn't theirs. Update, 6 months later. I thought you all might appreciate an update on the Homeowners Association pool situation. Things have gotten even more interesting since my last post. The class action lawsuit from the homeowners against the former board members concluded last month. It turns out Karen's scheme went deeper than anyone realized. She had been running similar scams with other amenities too, claiming certain private properties in the area were community features and charging fees for their maintenance. The investigation into the Homeowners Association's finances revealed she had collected over $200,000 in fees for amenities that didn't exist or weren't actually Homeowners Association property. She's now facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. The new Homeowners Association board has been fantastic. They completed their community pool last month, and it's actually really nice. They hired the same contractor I used for my pool, and it shows in the quality. They even named it the Pine Valley Pool to make it clear it's separate from my property. The best part? They've implemented a strict no Karen policy in their bylaws. While they couldn't legally call it that, they added specific rules about false claims of property ownership and misrepresentation of community amenities with immediate fines and possible expulsion from the Homeowners Association for violations. Several of the neighbors who were initially hostile have become good friends. We have regular invited pool parties now, and there's a standing joke about checking pool ownership status before diving in. The security cameras haven't caught a single trespasser in months, and my property values have actually increased since the whole ordeal, partly because the neighborhood has such a better reputation now with the new board. Sometimes standing up for what's right pays off in ways you never expect. Not only did I protect my property, but I helped expose a fraudster and brought the community closer together. Who knew a pool could cause so much drama, and ultimately, so much positive change? The next one is a malicious compliances story. This, a few years ago, roughly 4. I worked at an office about a 45 minutes drive from my house, and I had a friend who worked in the office I would give a ride home to. It was on my way. I literally had to pass by her house to go to and from work, so it was no big deal. Well, a woman who worked in my office lived really close to her and found out about the arrangement and wanted in. She guilted my friend into asking me since it was on my way. I said, okay. Well, at the same time, my late husband's car was in the shop, so I would make a detour to pick him up, and he's a giant of a man, 6'3", and could not physically fit in the back, so to make things easier, my friend would just sit in the back. Well, the other woman known as Karen was a big woman, not tall, but big. So on the way home, literally the first time she starts getting in the front, I explained to her she has to sit in the back. Well, we get to my husband's job site, and I park and text. She jumps out of the car and gets into the front. I tell her to go back and straight up says no because the seatbelt in the back is too tight. It hurts her chest. I tell her it's too bad she can get out of. She doesn't like it. Well, she gets out and goes to the back seat. My husband gets there and climbs in. I start the car, and the seatbelt warning light is on and beeping. She has the seatbelt off. I say you need to put the belt on. I am met with a no, I can't. It's easier if she's in front. Well, I say you're in back. We're not going anywhere until the belt is on. She crossed her arms like a child and says, I guess we're not going anywhere. I tell her if she doesn't put the belt on, she can get out and walk home. With a nice bit of snark, she says, well, you better call me a taxi. That pissed off, and that's what I did. I called a taxi. She puts her belt back on, but I say, it's too late, get out, you have a taxi coming. I say you can get out of my car now, or the police dot will be happy to remove you. She gets out and her jaw almost hit the road as it drove away. Outside my friend, I never let anyone from work in my car again. The next one is an entitled people's story. This is not one story, but multiple. For a little bit of context, I have a 7-month-old Doberman puppy, and she is a pretty difficult dog, even for her breed. This requires me to be strict and have some very clear rules. She responds well to this, and things are honestly going as well as they could. Anyone who has raised a puppy knows how difficult they can be at this time, and she is definitely no exception. You'd think that people being helpful would be good, but my experience so far has been that people aren't being helpful, but being rather entitled. I can count the amount of people who have actually been friendly about it on one hand, though I have lost count of the ones that are judgmental and condescending. Anyway, here are some of my experiences. Story number 1 was when I'd just gotten her and I saw this man with a really big and off-leash dog approaching, so I tried to tell him that our dogs probably shouldn't meet. I didn't know him, his dog, and didn't think it was the appropriate time. I guess I was both super tired and just caught off guard because I stumbled through my words a lot. He demanded to know why I didn't want them to meet, and when I struggled to explain why, he seemed to get really angry. I managed to explain that I was thinking of training her to be a service animal. But before I could explain anything else, he basically started yelling at me. He went on about how I was abusing her and whatnot. I was honestly super stressed because it was in the middle of nowhere, with no one to ask for help and nowhere to run to, so I don't remember exactly everything he said. I do remember saying that she has dog friends, but I guess unless I let her meet every dog we come across, it is not good enough. He walked off, but then stopped in the distance and started yelling some more. It really seemed like he was going to turn back around and do something worse, so I took my chance and quickly walked back to the train station, and I didn't stop until there were a few people in sight. Luckily, he didn't follow me. My dog was kind of anxious around strangers, both humans and dogs, after that, and it's only now that she's finally back to where we started, mostly just to get her to ignore people and dogs again, because I was forced to let her meet a bunch of strangers until she was no longer scared. I really did my best to be as calm as possible, but this guy was honestly terrifying. He was so busy accusing me of traumatizing my dog that he didn't even care to think he was doing just that. Story 2 is a lot less scary. It's a short one, but I keep thinking about how stupid it is. I was walking my dog, and on walks, I do not let her meet other dogs for various reasons. She does go to the dog park often. I see a stranger with 2 tiny dogs walking in the direction where I'm going, so to make sure my puppy doesn't get too distracted, which would result in me having to correct her, I walked the other way and gave her lots of rewards for successfully keeping her focus on me. This guy yells at me that I don't need to walk the other way. I looked back but then decided to ignore him, as at this point I knew not to argue with strangers who want to give advice. He yelled at me again, saying that I need to socialize my dog. He didn't sound angry like the other dude, but I still don't understand why you'd yell this at a stranger. You don't know me, my dog, or why I am doing this, so why judge? There could be 1,000 different reasons why I decided to do that, and none are his business. For all he knew, it is to keep his dogs safe. Story 3 happened today and is pretty similar to the last, though with this one I have a history. His really dominant and rather mean GSD approached my puppy once, when he was off-leash, and my terrified puppy, 9 weeks old at the time, was screaming at the top of her lungs, and he refused to call his dog back, saying he wouldn't listen anyway and that my puppy would just have to learn. This dog was just standing over her and invading her personal space while she was so young and small and absolutely terrified. Although my puppy overreacted in the situation, there is no way she would learn to feel safe that way. This went way too far, and I made sure not to walk in that area again. She is still terrified of GSDs, even though she likes all other dogs. I ran into him again, though this time the dog was leashed. I made my puppy sit and look at me so the man could pass, and surprisingly, she did incredibly well. What wasn't surprising was that the other dog tried to pull his owner towards us, though he luckily did keep walking. Not before yelling at me to give my dog more freedom, though, followed by how I need to socialize her and that now there was no way she would amount to anything. I was already having a bad day and this pissed me off, but I ignored him and my dog actually did really well. Story 4 is a bit different, as it was on social media. I posted a few pictures of my dog on my Instagram, not really bothering with a description or anything. They were just random cute pictures. However, on the internet, you are apparently guilty until proven innocent, and I kept getting comments from a few people telling me that my dog is dangerous and basically demanding that I justify myself by assuring them I am training her well. They kept asking me questions and making assumptions, even though there was absolutely no reason to think I am not doing a good job, nor that I didn't do any research. I never replied to these comments until I had a bad day, and I told them it wasn't any of their business. I soon realized this wouldn't help and just blocked them all, after which I took a break from social media. It was just so weird that these random people are assuming the worst about me for no reason. Last story. This isn't about someone giving me advice per se, but definitely an entitled person. I was walking my puppy and 2 women walked by. I greeted them before one stopped and told her friend to wait because she was going to pet my puppy. She didn't ask me, didn't look at me, and didn't hesitate for even a second. She basically just informed me that this was about to go down, and her tone was absolutely awful. No matter how much you like a dog you see, and no matter how cute you think it is, don't just go and pet a stranger's dog without permission. When she was still very little, dozens of people walked over and just reached over to pet her without even looking at me, completely ignoring the 4 do not pet signs she was wearing. I think only like 3 people in total ever asked if it was okay. Anyway, I politely told her that I didn't want her to pet my dog. She asked if my dog was aggressive and I said no, so she demanded to know why she wasn't allowed. I told her I am training her right now. She informed me that I do need to socialize my dog. I told her that I would happily do that whenever I see fit, which wasn't right now. I guess even though I was polite, I made it clear I wasn't about to argue with her because her attitude changed and she walked off while her friend laughed. Having a Doberman has really done wonders for my confidence in the way I handle things, especially if you look back at the first story. Long post, I know. Considering how a lot of these stories are about people accusing me of not socializing my dog, let me just assure you that I have done that and will continue to do so. It's just that walks are not the right time for this because of her personality. Trust me, LOL. But also because of what I am trying to achieve with my training. She gets to meet dogs and people at moments where it is appropriate and safe to do so with people who know how to act around my dog. I have a ton of experiences just like this, and it's honestly so frustrating, but I will not make this post any longer than it already is. If anything, I have learned that other people have shitty opinions, everyone is a dog expert, and that I should just ignore people who are quick to judge based on extremely limited information. Most people are just not worth your time, really. The next one is an entitled parent story. My boyfriend, 24M, and I, 24F, have been dating for almost a year now. I am extremely happy with him and he treats me so well. It's been an absolute dream being with him. He's the perfect man and I can't see my life without him. Our relationship has been amazing. A few weeks into us talking, I had a feeling we would be official, so I told my parents about him and also told them he has a son, 3M. They were initially stumped and told me they aren't the biggest fans, but they were overall kind about it and said it's my life so I can choose. I listened to them and kept it in my mind, but I decided to continue our relationship. After they realized I wasn't ending things with him, they became much more cold and rude to me. They told me they don't understand why I told them if they were going to say they don't approve and I just decide to continue the relationship. They said they'll never give us their blessing to marry, they'll never have us at events together, that they're mourning the death of their relationship with their daughter, etc. They have also told me I'm straining their marriage. They've sacrificed so much for me to throw it in their face and make rude comments calling me stepmommy in a condescending tone. Initially, I did try my best to have them meet and open a conversation for us to talk about it. I would be open and tell them where I'm going with him, if I'm staying at his place, or where I got my flowers from. He's gotten me flowers every month since we've been dating, hehe. But eventually, they told me they don't want to hear about it or see him, so I stopped telling them where I'm going completely. I spend much less time at home because of the tension, silent treatment, or rude behavior. It feels like a lose-lose telling them everything, trying to find a solution, or just leaving them alone. I live with them and I'm saving up to move out and be fully financially independent. They have already thrown finances in my face, mentioning how they pay my insurance and I live under their roof, which I agree, so the best thing would to just move out and get rid of one argument they have at least. There is constant tension in the house with them, and whenever we seem okay, it's because I just go straight to work and home. Every other month we seem to argue about all of this, but I've become tired. The arguments are full of harsh remarks and condescending comments about how I make stupid decisions, how I'm ruining the family and they'll never accept us and never attempt to. They've also said when our family doesn't like someone, they'll outcast them, and that's just how it is. So it's my decision to date him or be part of the family. They then go on to list all the family members they avoid because they don't like them or their partner. My mom also mentions how her personal trauma from having divorced parents will not allow her to accept my relationship or be involved in my life. My parents have an us versus them mentality with the rest of my family and credit their trauma for it. When I have spoken up about how that may not be the healthiest thing and how it makes no sense to love me unconditionally, then do the same to me, I'm just told that's the way our family works. I have tried many times to have a conversation and have been outspoken about how they don't talk to me to actually discuss things, rather they just yell at me. I've said I don't feel comfortable at home, considered, or seen as a person. All for it to lead to more yelling, scolding, and bullying. At this point, I know I haven't treated them the best recently because I have built so much resentment for them as well, and I'd rather not, but at the same time, I can't try to be happy in the house knowing their kindness and love feels conditional. Any advice would be appreciated. I love my family dearly, but I want to stand my ground for someone I care about and for my own boundaries. I know they want what they think is best for me, but I can't justify this treatment. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.